into it because once again, I want to thank just our incredible panelists who are leaders in the space for joining us. I know they don't have a lot of time. They're doing the work. So once again, on The Other America, we like to bring together this mix of healers, storytellers, and activists who are fighting to change the world. And we want to really create an open conversation so that others can take action as well. And that's the point of this virtual town hall we have, to really create those bridges for these uncomfortable conversations towards action. So without further ado, of course, we are focusing on the Senate race in Georgia today. I want to give a shout out to Xander Schultz again, winbothseats.org. We're about to get into what that is all about, who really helped, bring this together and is always just such a great supporter and doing amazing things. And I'm just so inspired by you. Let's bring up Ian Bridgeforth, the founder and executive director of Georgia Shift, an organization giving marginalized young people a seat at the table of democracy. Thank you again. Where are you at right now? There you are. Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate it as I go through everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Moving on, we're going to Howard Franklin. Howard Franklin, this is what happens when I have to direct this as well. There you are. Managing partner, Ohio River South. Howard has led nonprofits, served in government, elected and lobbied government officials across 24 states. He maintains dual citizenship in the public and private sectors and has helped drive billions in public investment while consulting for industry leaders across tech, healthcare, hospitality, transit, and real estate. So thank you so much. And of course, 4 years ago, he founded Ohio River South, a Southern-focused government affairs firm that has served more than 200 clients in 9 Southern states. Howard, thank you.
Thank you for having me. Excited about it.
Yes, Maya King, who I actually met through a lot of people I meet through my radio show, a lot of incredible people. She's a journalist at Politico. She's been very instrumental in covering the election in Georgia. And so I thought she would be a great addition today. So thank you, Maya, for being here.
For having me.
And then finally, we've got, this was a last minute addition. Looking, where are you at? Where are you at? One second. Sorry. Jess, where is Jess? Jess Morales is joining us right now. Oh, I think you're off video, so I can't bring you in. Jess Morales is a nationally, oh, there she is, okay. Thank you, Jess, for joining us on the road. Jess Morales Rocketto is a nationally recognized political strategist and community organizer. She is a civic engagement director at the National Domestic Workers Alliance and executive director of Care in Union. Under her leadership, Care in Union has expanded to 11 states, endorsed nearly 100 candidates, become a multi-million-dollar operation in just 4 short years. And Georgia is the flagship state for Care in Action. The domestic worker movement had the largest IE operation for Stacey Abrams' race in 2018. And in 2019, Jess was honored in the first Time 100 Next, a list of rising stars who are shaping the future. Jess, an honor to have you. And hi, love it. I love your hat. And then just Xander is a social impact entrepreneur, has done so much focusing on empowering marginalized communities and their leaders. He's the founder of When We Band Together, One for Democracy, #DefeatByTweet, and #WinBothSeats, and the host of the What We Don't Know podcast. So thanks to everyone for being here. And we just have so many different angles of this. I just want to jump right in and get into first with Xander with win2seats.org, because you brought this together after November 3rd to launch this. And some of the organizations are here that are involved within both seats, but can you explain what that is and what people need to know?
Yeah, I think we were just trying to quickly stand up a way for people to fund the Black and brown organizers that won Georgia for Joe Biden. What's been really cool about this last election cycle is it feels like the idea that investing in Black and brown led organizers, investing in relational organizing has proven to be the best political investment you can make. These have proven to be the most effective leaders that we have in the field. And so following the general, Stacey Abrams was rightfully getting a lot of credit. And so we knew Fair Fight was going to get a lot of funding, and we knew everyone was becoming familiar with the name Ossoff and the name Warnock. And so we knew the campaigns were going to get a lot of funding. And so we just wanted to also provide an alternative for folks to, Stacy's Fair Fight is in our fund as well, but a way to quickly fund this field that all play a critical role in getting voters to turn out. And sometimes I hesitate to even say it like that because it's not a transactional relationship. Really, like the investment is to allow these communities to have a proper seat at the table. People say the word low propensity voters. And, recently in my conversations, I think the proper term is probably underinvested voters. Other communities get a lot of investment in turning out, and that's why you see them turn out. And not only do you have underinvestment, then you also have like active voter suppression and these hurdles put in place. And so, I always find my role as just, I'm lucky. I work at a family office. We invest about $20 million a year in racial justice work. So I'm familiar with these organizations and like how heroic they are. And so I'm just trying to create a vehicle here that makes it easier for folks to quickly invest in folks like Ian, folks like Jess, who are doing the work out there and help them build, these constituencies that aren't just going to have power this election cycle, but the more they build these groups out, they're going to have a seat at the table in every election cycle. Politicians are going to have to go through them, get their endorsement, et cetera. The larger and stronger these groups are.
Xander, I wonder if you could share what are, you have a really good read on tactics. You guys have done something really non-traditional and really interesting. What are some interesting ways in which you've seen on the ground activists organize or use digital or any other sort of highlights and bright spots?
I'm probably not. I think, Ian and Jess are probably the better people that.
I was going to say I would love to, because those are really the folks that are on the ground. But yeah, do you want to just add any insight to that?
I'll just say, I think we put our fund together in a way that highlights each one of those, each one of those skills. So Ian's organizing young people in Georgia. Jess at Domestic Workers Alliance, they're organizing domestic workers across the state. Rashad Robinson and Color of Change PAC, they're doing a really good job digitally. They're a national org that's able to shift their lens in all sorts of places. And they've really leaned into this idea of joy and like not making it so much about resistance, but like, trying to make it about, it's fun to build this movement and to turn out and all these things. And so there's been an incredible diversity of strategies. But first and foremost, like what the foundation needs to be a familiarity with the communities you're engaging with, and the ability to hire and organize from there.
Yeah, on that note, I would love to get the take from Howard, Jess, and Ian from how they did strategize moving into this election and now obviously moving forward to these Senate runoff races. Do you want to start? We're Howard. Yes.
Yeah, sure. I feel like this question was probably more appropriately directed to activists. And then, as much as I think my roots are in activism, I'm definitely in the professional sphere of politicking these days. So I'm definitely also interested in hearing what activists have been doing here on the ground. Our firm was actually engaged by a number of organizations, some that I think have been noted here, Vote.org and the National Urban League, the NAACP, and then also some of the establishment organizations that obviously have vested interest in success in these Senate races, including the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and the DNC. And a lot of what we've been trying to do is support, I think, the really thoughtful activism that's already bubbling up organically, not just in this election cycle, but in election cycles past. I think I gave a quote to a national reporter maybe 3 or 4 months ago, as folks were finally beginning to see Georgia as a battleground state on the bubble. And I attributed whatever success that Biden, Harris were going to have on November 3rd to, what we affectionately refer to in professional football as the 12th man. I think there are a lot of unheralded organizations and individuals that really sprung up in previous election cycles. I think, Jon Ossoff and the folks who rallied behind him in 2017 in his House bid. I think obviously Stacey Abrams, who's a former boss of mine, is the godmother of this movement and really bringing organizers of color to the forefront of establishment-led conversations and establishment-backed politicking. So I think a lot of what I was able to do and what my firm was able to do and doing outreach and general consulting strategy was really in support of work that had to be done for us to have any chance. And unfortunately, work that's still much more deserving in the amount of attention it gets and the leadership that deserves to be put on the pedestal here. And I think, win, lose, or draw come January 5th, a lot of the names and the people who have been pushing quietly in the background are going to be much more well known after this election cycle.
That's great.
And speaking of which, there are some key dates that I just want to mention for those watching who are in Georgia or friends in Georgia. Please share. November 18th, election officials can begin mailing absentee ballots. December 7th, voter registration deadline. December 14th, in-person early voting begins, and January 5th is election day. Polls close at 7 p.m. Eastern. So yes, so there's no confusion, because it seems like this continues to be a confusing narrative with all the dates for everyone. So let's go into, that strategy and like what each of you have a different angle in terms of your work that you did leading up to the election and the work that continues. So I'd love to hear each of your perspectives and what went into that. Jess, do you want to go?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. Thanks for bearing with me while I was on the road. I was doing a Green New Deal action this morning.
Love it.
We're putting in the work. Yes, at Current Action, we have really invested in Georgia as, our most important state. When I came to the domestic worker movement and started building political power, it was after 10 years of organizing domestic workers around the country and winning Bill of Rights for domestic workers in 9 different states and 1 city at that time. And we are actually quite experienced at the type of organizing that I think has been so transformative in Georgia, because people told us forever and ever that it was too hard to organize domestic workers, that you couldn't find them, that their hours were irregular, that it's difficult to organize a disaggregated workforce, and we did that. And so when we got into politics, people told us, the voters you want to talk to, they're too hard to talk to. They are, Xander, I love your formulation of underinvested in. We call what many people call sporadic voters high potential voters. And the reason we call them high potential is because when women of color who do not vote in every single election, when they actually vote, they vote with our values. They're very clear about what they care about. They care about our democracy. They care about respect and dignity at work. They care about care for everyone. And the answer here is that they actually just, nobody has talked to them. In 2018, when we were on the doors for Stacey Abrams in communities that some people just never go to, we actually had people, I've been working on campaigns for 15 years. We actually had people who run out of their house and tell us, I have been waiting for you. So what we've seen all over the state is that there are people who are ready. And then we saw that happen in 2020. If you would have told us, 6, 7, 8 years ago that Georgia could turn blue, we would have said, we believe it, because we knew that it was possible with investment, with talking to communities in ways that really answer who we already are, instead of like trying to get somebody to somewhere where they're not, that we could actually make this happen. And we knew if we invested in grassroots organizing, I think people are always looking for the next hot thing, but to be honest, what we have found over and over again is that face-to-face conversations with people have really made the difference. We had to make a big pivot because of COVID to go on the phones. And we've made millions of calls across the state, almost 9 million calls across the state for the general election. We'll knock on 1 million doors for this runoff because we believe so deeply that it's really critical for us to have face-to-face conversations with people about what they care about. And when we do that, what we have seen is that our folks turn out, they vote the way that our country needs to move in the direction that it needs to move. And they are taking the democracy on their backs. For domestic workers, that's something that our folks have been doing for a long time. They take our families on their backs. And we want to make sure that the elected officials, and frankly, that the whole country, that it's time to elect people who really go with our values. So we're excited about this runoff. We feel optimistic it's going to be an uphill battle, but with everybody kind of doing their part, we think that this is very, very possible, and it's never been more needed than it is now.
Yeah, thank you. I love your enthusiasm and your positivity around this. It's really infectious. And I'm not surprised that you're able to do the work that you do with that passion. So thank you for all your hard work. And I would love to move on to Ian in terms of what your strategy was. You know, young people, you assume social media. Was it all about social and digital for you to really activate? And then what are you doing moving into the next election? A lot of people are saying they're signing people up, like whose birthday they're turning 18 now. Are we going to see an ability to get more votes in because of that?
Yeah, so I think it's a couple things. So the way we approached it was like a statewide sort of campus model, but also a local model at the same time. The campus model sort of was, we have a 13 campus network. And because of COVID, things were a little weird. So some campuses were doing in person, some campuses weren't. And so the idea is we formed a network to bring in like the staff and administrators from different institutions to say, hey, how can we make sure that the students are more civically engaged? Admittedly, some campuses are better than others. So like Georgia State is very progressive in making sure they have access to voter registration, absentee ballot work, that kind of thing. And so making sure we also have like HBCUs involved. And so just, you know, people will say young people are apathetic and that kind of thing, but that's wrong. But also it's a thing of basic education, or how do we make sure that they have everything that they need to go vote for like absentee ballot work, or if they want to do in person, whatever it is, we want to make sure that they have access to those resources. And so we did that. And so we reached and engaged about 46,000 students this past cycle. And then on the local level, so we're based 2 hours east of Atlanta in Augusta. And so we actually didn't talk about the presidency at all. There's actually a local DA race in that area. And so one of the things that we did was and there was also some school, a Board of Education races as well. And so we were very local and said like the school to prison pipeline is on the ballot. And so, you know, and also just FYI, we also have a C4, which we could do a little more nefarious things with. And so the idea was we had a 32-year-old Black candidate and a incumbent who essentially said that she wanted to ensure law and order. And so we wanted to make sure that we told people like exactly here's what law and order actually means. And we sent a bunch of mail, especially knowing that they were going to get their ballot back and everything. And so the 32-year-old, we have the first Black DA in this area because of the work that we did, because we focused specifically on like showing, like highlighting, hey, here's what law and order means, but also like talking about like, hey, if you want kids in classrooms, not courtrooms, you want jobs over jails, counselors over cops, all these different things like that, and making sure that young people knew here's what's happening, and making that hyper local so they know, hey, this can affect, you know, especially there's a lot of young parents in the K through 12 education system. And so that was one of the things that we felt like we want to focus on, that versus, you know, they were going to hear about the presidency and that kind of thing, and every single, you know, Instagram, Twitter, SoundCloud, everything was reminding you to go vote. But it's like, how do we make sure that they know that this DA race is important and driving turnout for that?
That's great. Appreciate the work you're doing in Georgia. You know, I've asked some other questions for you. I wanted to turn to Maya King and get a sense from a political perspective. I know Georgia was a big focus for you. You know, what were you seeing in Georgia? Maybe if you want to highlight Shira, if you want to highlight Maya. What were you seeing from a journalistic perspective in Georgia, and what are some interesting insights maybe that you were looking at?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, Georgia has certainly become the center of the political universe over the last few weeks. And one of the biggest stories out of the state is the role of grassroots organizing, which is something that I've covered and looked at, especially as it relates to, I mean, the big number that really is floating around in my mind quite often is that 800,000 new voters who are registered between 2018 and 2020. That was, I mean, it made really, truly all the difference in turning Georgia blue, or at least delivering that margin of votes for Joe Biden to put him over the top. And I think that's another, you know, me and a number of my colleagues who are also following the races down there really have our eyes on the grassroots community there. I'm like taking notes, listening to everyone, because what we're looking for now, of course, is what the number will be heading into the runoffs. I understand there are about 20,000 voters who will turn 18 between November 3rd and January 5th. I believe, or January 5th, when the runoff election will take place. And, you know, inside how to reach out to these groups has just really been fascinating, and something that I've covered pretty extensively and just looked at from a demographic point of view. So another thing that I've also really followed is this idea of rural voters and the demographics of rural voters. A lot of times the mistake that a lot of reporters have made is to just kind of blanketly paint those voters as white, when in reality there are really large populations of Black voters, which is something that I know Raphael Warnock was really able to tap into, Latino voters as well. And so, yeah, just really breaking down this state beyond just, the way that we usually view the South and the way that we usually view Southern politics. I think Georgia has really given us different insights into how these things really operate, and, how to get out the vote beyond traditional political advertising. And of course, door knocking, and how that even changes now in the midst of a pandemic. So it's really been very diverse and extremely fascinating for me.
Thank you so much. I want to
That's
ask,
awesome.
it's funny. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I
go
just
ahead.
said that's awesome. Yeah, thank you. Like, you're such an amazing contribution here, and whatever questions you have, feel free to throw them in. This is an open discussion. Whatever
Yeah.
you want to know about.
I have a couple questions, because you actually touched on something. And as someone who lived in Atlanta for a while in the state of Georgia, I was sitting at home in LA, just, getting my county by county numbers. It was shocking to me, some of the counties in the presidential election and how they voted. More for Howard and Ian. Were there some surprises for you? I know you guys are way more in the trenches than I am, county by county, but I was, having lived there, knowing what those counties feel like when I'm there, was really shocked at some of the numbers. Any of those stand out for you guys?
I guess I'll jump in first, since you said my name first, James. And I remember those years when you lived in Atlanta, and seeing you around town. So we miss you. But to your question, I actually wrote an op-ed that got published in a political magazine here, predicting that we would win the state, at least at the top of the ticket, and not necessarily making the same prediction for some of the bottom of the ticket races. But I think a couple of things are worth noting. One, and I think Maya's comment leans into this. A lot of the change that's been discussed has really been focused on population centers in the suburbs. So obviously there's a tremendous amount of interest in Gwinnett County and Cobb County and the like. And those counties, true to form, did not disappoint. They went heavily for Biden. They elected 2 dynamic young women as their new chair for each county commission, both Cobb and Gwinnett. And so now all five of the collar counties, Metro Atlanta, that's Fulton, DeKalb, Clayton, and Cobb, are all now led by an African-American chair, and they're all now led by a Democratic majority. And I think that's something to take a moment and pause and acknowledge. You've got 5 Democratic-led, minority-led county governments that represent more than 3 million people in Georgia's 10 million. So I think that's a real sea shift. And I could talk for a long time about why that is. But the long and short of it is that even though we think of, in much the same way that Maya pointed out, that pollsters and kind of national folks sometimes think of rural communities as white, I think oftentimes people have thought of Metro Atlanta communities as Democratic. And to see that Cobb and Gwinnett, which are 2 very diverse counties, Gwinnett, oftentimes referred to as the most diverse county in America, will actually have been led by Republicans, white Republicans in both cases, or with just a single Democratic representative in either commission to swing all the way to Democratic control, I think is definitely noteworthy. I think the other thing worth noting is that some of the counties that, again, have been longstanding Republican bellwethers, we kind of think of these in political parlance as vote centers, the Forsyth counties of the world, the Henry counties of the world, that are smaller than the major counties that I just went through, but still substantial in their population. They are also trending toward Democrats. So while we may not have won all those counties, we went from losing many of them 75-25 or 60-40 down to a nearly 50-50 split. And that's a big portion of the votes that Biden, Harris, and a number of the other successful campaigns were able to rely on in November. And they're also going to have to perform for us again, at least get us closer to parity by January 5th.
Thank you for that, Howard. And Ian, take me out further, zoom out a little more in the state of Georgia and give us a little bit of context on what that looks like outside of Metro Atlanta.
Yeah, so we have this term in Georgia called essentially like the Black Belt, and if you look from one side of the state, sort of Columbus, Georgia, all the way to Augusta, and there are a bunch of counties in between. All of those counties pretty much have a bunch of Black and brown people who typically haven't been engaged and invested in. And so what I'm excited about is seeing, Stacey was the first candidate to me that who really like took time and invested in these voters and these kinds of things. And I think you're seeing the fruits of what's happening where there are some counties that I've driven through that I typically don't like to drive through that have turned blue and that kind of thing. And I was really exciting to see. And so it's with, even if it's light blue, it's still blue. And so that's very exciting to see that the Black Belt is being invested in. And I want to make sure that we continue to invest in the Black Belt, because I think that's where there are a lot of people who feel left out, but also on the, let's just say even at the state legislative level, there's a lot of seats and things like that in those areas that need to be invested in. And so excited to see that come to fruition in a lot of ways.
And Jess, I wonder if I can ask you, so much when people who don't live in the state of Georgia think about in Atlanta and Georgia, they think about Black folks and white folks, but little is often said about the emerging brown community. I wonder if you could talk about the Latin community vis-a-vis the state of Georgia and some perspectives that you have.
Yeah, I mean, it's really exciting because I think one of the things about Georgia that is really unique is I do feel like it represents America as it is now. And that is awesome because it means that it is a place where there are so many different types of communities, and even among different ethnic groups, you have different types of folks in there. You have college educated and non-college educated folks. You have people who are commuting into Metro Atlanta area but are living in the suburbs. You have rural, urban, like it's just truly, it is like a snapshot of all different ways that people live in America in one state. And I think that's true of the Latinx community as well. There are about 1 million, little less than 1 million Latinos in Georgia, probably about 350,000 eligible voters. And that sounds small, but in a place like Georgia, where to Ian's point, like it's light blue, but it's still blue, those people could be, the 1%, 2%, 3% potentially that, kind of flips it blue from red. So that small population can really have a big impact. But I think you also have Latino community that are doing a couple of different types of things. You have a more Puerto Rican professionalized class that probably has a college degree. Then you have Mexican and Central American, mostly Mexican campesinos who are working in rural agriculture, who are working in the hospitality industry, who are domestic workers. And so it's a real interesting kind of microcosm of what's happening. And then you also have, some of those older, first gen or even immigrant and undocumented folks. Then you have their children who are growing up Latino and Southern, which is a really, interesting experience, and in a predominantly Black community as well. And so all of that, of course, you have Afro-Latinos, particularly in the Puerto Rican population. So all of that is kind of coming into the mix of what Latino voters look like in Georgia. They speak Spanish, they speak English. Many of them are more rural, more outside of the Atlanta metro area. And the fact that those folks are going to be able to have a really big impact in this race into potentially deciding control of the United States Senate is a really exciting development, I think, for Latino voters, particularly because of the kind of weird narrative, sometimes inaccurate narrative that is being put forward about Latino voters in this election, kind of more broadly in our country.
No, I love that. One of the things I really enjoyed about living in Atlanta was the emerging populations that people didn't see. I grew up in the Bay Area, so I grew up super in the center of lots of different cultures. And no one talks about like the Korean population in Gwinnett that's rising.
Totally. Yes, there's a big Asian population, big Korean, Chinese, Asian Americans Advancing Justice is doing that work, and it's like there's so many people who are kind of organizing each little tiny pocket, and it really is like greater than the sum of its parts in that way.
Yeah. No, so glad that you said that. It is representative of when I was, again, just having a little bit of FOMO, sitting here in LA, watching what's happening in Georgia, missing my mom who lives in Atlanta, my in-laws who live in Atlanta, and missing the wonderful folks that I got to spend time with there. I just, and even though I live here in California and it's seen as this sort of melting pot, I really feel like Georgia is this sort of future model where, of where America is going. The largest Muslim mosque in the Southeast is in Gwinnett, if I'm not mistaken. And there's just so much going on there. Emerging Jewish population. It's always been there for us, marched side by side with Dr. King and so many civil rights leaders. The Atlanta Jew, I always say, is a different type of Jew. So there's all kinds of interesting narratives within the state of Georgia and Atlanta. And, it's really good to meet you and to reconnect, Howard, with you, and to meet you as well, Ian, and just commend the work that you guys are doing. I wish I was there on the ground with you guys. I actually contemplated jumping on a plane and just spending the rest of December to put in some work, but my family didn't quite work out. But we really are extremely, we're here for you. I'm friends with Dr. Warnock and Raphael. I've been talking to him a lot, supporting, everybody that's out there doing the work. And we at the Other America, we're just a platform of many platforms that's trying to put in some work on the internets, and want to support everything. If you guys need anything, please let us know. Shira, I think we should take some questions, yeah?
Yeah, and then Maya, if you have any questions,
Can I cut in?
Xander, what do you have to say?
Sorry, real shortly. I think
Yeah.
what you all just mentioned is exactly why we put together Winbow Seats, right? We have Asian American Advocacy Fund in there for organizing that Korean population you talked about. Care in Action organizes so many different populations because they have that domestic workers thread. And so I think what you talked about was kind of, you just hit the nerve on like why we created this fund. It's like politics is small, actually. It feels big sometimes, but it's small. And so you need all these local organizers. And then I had a question for Jess and Ian, if it's all right if I ask one.
This is an open conversation for everyone.
I know, our as in like the family office I work for, a lot of the initiatives we start, our goal is often in racial justice, criminal justice reform, and then that those DA races that Ian mentioned, et cetera, those turn into top of the ballot votes oftentimes, but that's not how you organize in those communities. A lot of people feel like the federal government's never really done it, and they're not wrong in thinking that the federal government does less for them than the local elections do. I just want to hear how you're thinking about what you're hearing without having those down ballot races to talk about and get voters to turn out. How are folks thinking about just a pure federal election in the groups you're organizing? Ian, I'll play popcorn master. Ian, and I'll shoot to you, Jess.
I think two things. One of the things, we'll be starting doing like essentially lit drops, dropping like care packages at voters' doors and that kind of thing early next week. But one of the things that we're talking to people online about is like, do you want to go outside next summer? And so it's like, cool. In a way, as far as like the COVID relief package and even things like canceling student debt and all those things, like how do you, like all of those things matter in this space. Like imagine your student debt just being erased. And so those kinds of things, I think, like making sure that we're highlighting those issues and making sure we're repeating that day in and day out. And so that's part of I think the thing is, how do we make it relatable and saying, oh yeah, like I really do want to go outside next summer because I haven't done it, this year, and I can't go visit my family for Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever. And it's like, well, I shouldn't say turtle man, but Mitch McConnell sort of is like, is holding a lot of this stuff up, and Georgia could be the place to change everything.
Right on. Jess?
Plus Ian, and I think like for many of the folks that we're talking to, both domestic workers and women of color, they're the ones who are most hit by COVID. And there's a real clear understanding that COVID cannot, the governor cannot find a vaccine for COVID on his own, and that we really need to help support a COVID relief package, which has been a huge part of our advocacy over this last year, in addition to our electoral work. Many domestic workers are undocumented or from immigrant families and did not receive any relief. We've been surveying over none this year. we've been serving over 10,000 workers for 6 months. And what we've heard from workers is over 70% of them are not back to work. The ones that are back to work make even less money per client than they did before. And, are getting, having kind of contentious conversations with employers who are expecting that the worker wear a mask, but are not wearing a mask themselves. And so like Ian, this stuff is like elemental. I just, there's no other way to say it, like in folks' lives. They're super clear that what's happening right now is not what we need and it has to change. And so when we use that as an entry point to then have a conversation about the way that we do that is by electing these senators, these 2 men as senators, it's really, people are like, okay, and there's some skepticism. I don't want to like pretend like there isn't. There's absolutely some skepticism. And then, part of what we do at Care in Action is not just be there for the election cycle, but be there for legislative advocacy in state and federally. And when folks kind of, just see us showing up, it's clear, like, even if these elected officials don't show up for us, we will continue to show up. We will continue to work together and then also hold those folks accountable.
That's great. And thank you, Xander, for bringing in those questions too. And I want to let it really is a town hall, so anyone can really chat. We just help moderate and curate. But I kind of, as we wrap, I know that this is going to be an hour or so, but Maya, one, do you have any questions? Because I know you're covering these stories, so I'm sure you have some questions for these folks. I want to throw to you.
Thank you. Yes, I do. One thing that I've really been following in this time is this, just really this idea that Georgia has kind of changed our approach or the way that we think about getting out the vote. I know that was something that I said earlier, but really this idea that, Democrats can expand their coalition by not just appealing to like white moderates or undecideds or trying to kind of add the never Trumpers, but also to, tap into communities of color and, as was mentioned, underinvested communities, people that really haven't felt like they were a part of the political system, but absolutely can be the difference makers in this. And I feel like, there's a tension point there between the way that campaigns aim to expand their coalitions and what grassroots organizers are saying that they're seeing on the ground. And I was wondering if anyone might be able to weigh in on this. Have there ever been any instances where you're seeing like campaign consultants saying, you have all this money, it's time for you to buy ads, or you need to go online and expand your web presence, while maybe you're actually saying, no, you should be knocking on doors, you should be talking to people face to face, you should be texting folks, like you should be really trying to get to know these communities that way. Just kind of wondering, if there's, if you see the disconnect there, and if there is one.
If I could jump in, Maya, I would say, I would take your question and turn it a little bit. I think the pandemic's made it difficult for consultants to insist on a particular way of voter contact. But I do think, and I'm sure you guys have covered this, the consternation from House Democrats about the, falling far short of the expected gains in Congress and the United States Senate, to me, a lot of the focus has been on the set of issues that gets talked about and whether or not the set of issues is going to be germane to and attracted to both the white moderates that are part of the original coalition that elected Democrats, into the 19th and the 20th century versus marginalized communities, folks who, have a healthy fear of the police, folks who have a healthy distrust of government, folks who have a healthy distrust of many other institutions that have not done right by us for virtually the entire time that we've been in this country. And to me, I think that's the question that has to be answered. I think there's been a tenuous balance. I appreciate all the fawning over the state of Georgia and the diversity that it has quietly fostered over the last couple decades. But I think that diversity has also fostered a challenge as it relates to the identity politics and the balance of power. Even in our state legislature where we lobby, and just a couple blocks from where we are in my office today, we've got majority minority Democratic-led caucuses in both the House and the Senate. And so just this past week, we elected new leadership for both. In the Senate, the minority leader nearly lost a primary last year and decided not to run, or 2 years ago, and decided not to run for re-election. He's an older white man. Here in the House, there are only 2 rural right Democrats in the Democratic caucus left, and one of them, who was also the minority leader, was targeted by national Republicans and beaten in the general election. So a lot of the remaining policy priorities, it's still seen through a lens of race, and it's still a challenge, not just at the ballot box, but even as we get into governance. And so to me, that's the question that we're going to have to spend some time answering, win, lose, or draw. And unfortunately, whatever happens in the Senate races, and of course, I want to win them. We're engaged. I heard you guys mention the Asian American Advocacy Fund, their client. A number of these, I think the question that will be answered, unfortunately, is going to be a pendulum. And if for whatever reason, when the numbers are dissected, it feels like not enough moderate or college educated or white women voted for the Democratic nominees, you know, some folks are going to say, hey, we got to spend more time courting that part of our coalition. We've got to make bigger investments in the issue sets that matter to them and less on some of the other things that might appeal to Black and brown, you know, members of the coalition. So to me, that's the pendulum that swings every couple of years. And it's really been an either or conversation about white moderates or people of color being the real base or the real swing voters in the Democratic and any Democratic success story. Sorry for the long answer.
Does anyone else want to answer that or speak to that?
I actually want to just answer one of the questions that was in the chat because I think it's really important.
Yeah, okay.
The last couple of minutes. So, you know, somebody asked, what are the challenges to get out the Democratic vote in bigger numbers in the presidential election, right, in and in person? I mean, I don't know if folks know, but this is like the 4th or 5th election that they've had in Georgia this year. Elections have been changed dates, you know. So I think honestly, one of the biggest challenges is being like, come on out again. Like, I know you did it basically just last month and like there's a couple months before that and a couple months before that, but like, got to do it one more time. I actually really do think that's one of the biggest challenges. Plus the timing is the other biggest challenge. Election is January 5th. Early vote starts January 14th. Early vote is not consistent across the state. And by not consistent, I mean every single county has different early vote times and links. So, you know, the voter suppression, I don't know how to communicate how active voter suppression is in Georgia. It is wild. I mean, it's so wild. Here's a really good example in Gwinnett County at an elementary school. We were doing poll watching and they told us that the reason the line was 3 hours long is because they didn't have any pens for people to fill out ballots. Just as a reminder, we were at an elementary school. So like it is so like elemental to the way that elections are there. And so one of the, you know, I think like one of the huge things we have to do is just like get out the message that there is an election on January 5th and that you got to turn out and that there's early vote and when early vote is in your county. I think the other one is that, particularly for Reverend Warnock, you know, he was at the very bottom of the ballot. Like that was a huge message in the general election that just passed, was literally like, go to the bottom of your ballot and vote for the guy at the bottom. There were 21 candidates in the primary. So, you know, we just really got to up name ID of both Ossoff and Warnock, but especially Warnock. In the race like that's really, really important. So huge focus now is just like getting as many of those mail-in ballots as we possibly can, especially because of the way the mail is going to work with the holidays. Want to get it in as soon as we possibly can for people. And there's a lot of effort in particular to get to the doors and tell people right now, you gotta make sure that you turn in your ballot. Don't wait.
Yeah, that's nerve-wracking to get people back out. It seems like, you know, already there was such, you know, focus on the main election and then to say, oh, another one. Like, do you feel like there's going to be a drop-off and what is everyone doing?
I mean, that's partly why we need all the investment. You know, many of us just went so hard in the paint trying to make this happen. I mean, I'm sure Ian can talk to this as well, but you know, everyone is just scurrying to mount operations. A lot of big programs went on the doors this week. You know, getting mail pieces dropped as soon as possible, dropping lit as soon as possible. And just even the fact that people are going on the doors, like part of that is because there's a real clarity that this is absolutely essential and that phones aren't just going to cut it. So, you know, just a huge, important piece of really going back to voter contact as much as possible.
And I can I'll speak a little bit to that as well. So as like we're like trying to ramp up as well as like getting like there's a lot of people who want to help and sort of doing traffic control and saying, hey, we're going to send, if you want to send 500,000 texts, like here's where to go, those kinds of things. And so I think really doing it repeatedly as far as like saying, hey, whether you want to vote in person or absentee ballot, like here's the way to do it, and then following up and that kind of thing. We call it basically ballot chasing. And so I think as far as the campaign, one of the things we've been toying around with is almost like because we engage young people, we can kind of be a little more edgier, I guess. And the fact of like saying like, hey, like voting is Black AF or brown AF, or voting is like beautiful AF or something like having those kinds of things where it's almost like making voting kind of just like what you do and not like almost like part of just culture and that kind of thing. And so that is something that like we're focused on, and because we know like the campaigns are, and Warnock has talked about this, like they're going to say that Warnock kills puppies, or Ossoff is like, I don't know, does whatever. And so like trying to almost like get out of that and do something that's more positive in some ways, I think is something that, especially during the holidays, like, so that's one of the things that we're focusing on, is that kind of messaging.
Definitely. We do have some questions. Some of you are answering questions in the chat, which we appreciate because we don't have necessarily time to fully answer. But Indy, I think that general strike to demand human rights support, I think if we win the Senate, we'll have more human rights support. That's for sure. I think that's the feeling. So we, unfortunately, we need to take that step and push for that. That's my take on that. Besides what we can each do as individuals. We're going to wrap it up. Does anyone else have any questions before we go, or anything you want to say before we wrap it up and do a little bit of a closing intention setting meditation?
Hey fam, I got to run, but I just want to say thank you so much for the platform. Jess and Ian, thank you so much for your work. It's an honor to, find ways to support you all. And if anyone wants to get involved with us, Sheer has my contact info as well. And we're at winbowseats.org to fund these amazing orgs and the orgs they've been speaking about as well.
Yeah,
right, thank
doing
you,
great
thank
work.
you so much,
Bye,
everyone.
Xander, you're amazing.
All right, cheers.
All right, bye. Okay, as we wrap things up, if we're good to go, I want to just, thank everyone for their time and energy and everything they're doing, all the hard work. So appreciate you, and anything we can do to support, let us know. We're going to be connecting everyone on our email list with all your organizations. We can connect all the panelists because it seems like collaborations can be had as well. We appreciate your time. I want to thank again. I'm going to go through the list. Howard Franklin, thank you. Anything you want to share promotion wise, where people could find you, all that?
Yeah, we're easy to find. Ohio River South on the internet and on social media, but thank you for having us.
Awesome. Ian, Bridgeforth.
Thank you for having me. Just Georgia Shift on all platforms, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. You can just find us.
Awesome. And Jess.
I have to hop, but we're at Karen Action US everywhere. Thank you so much. Really appreciated this.
Yeah, thank you. And Maya, where can people find you? Where are you at? Oh, there you are.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me. Follow. I'll still be covering Georgia. I'm on Twitter at Maya A. King, and of course, Politico.com.
Love it. Well, thank you again. And Indy, thank you for doing our opening meditation. I don't know, we could do a little closing if we want, just like literally a minute just to get grounded, and then we'll say goodbye.
Grounded? I think the opposite. Let's everybody clap for yourself.
Okay, yes, there you go.
Come on. Let's everybody, come on, you guys, let's clap. In Kundalini and in meditation, clapping activates your whole nervous system. So we can just clap. Yeah, it's like super good for us. Come on, guys. Give yourself a round of applause.
Thank you for that. James, any closing remarks? I know you're saying goodbye too. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. Let's continue to care for each other, collaborate, and do great things together. So
awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Bye.
Thanks.